Sinking into the shifting sand, she heard laughter in the distance, voices claiming a fat disgrace, like her didn't deserve saving. But a widowed Apache warrior pulled her out with his own hands and discovered that this rejected woman was the mother his little daughter had been praying for. The sun rose red over the Arizona mountains, painting the rocks and stubborn cacti that clung to the dry earth with a sanguine hue. It was March 1878, and winter still left its mark in the icy mornings that cut the skin like blades. Nahalo walked in silence along the narrow trail, his bare feet knowing every stone, every thorn, every depression in the arid ground. His black hair fell loose over his broad shoulders, and the scars on his bare chest told stories he would never share with words. Beside him, tiny as a sparrow, walked Ayana, 5 years old, with bright black eyes, 2 short braids swaying to the rhythm of her hurried steps to keep up with her father's long legs. She wore a soft, deerskin dress, decorated with blue and red beads her mother had sewn before departing for the spirit world. "Father, why are we going so far today?" the little girl asked, her small voice echoing in the morning silence. Nahalo didn't answer immediately. He stopped, knelt, and touched the earth with the palm of his hand. He felt the vibration. Water. A lot of water accumulated somewhere nearby. The winter rains had been intense, and that meant danger. "The earth is restless, little eagle," he said, his voice low and rough. "We need to check the traps before it swallows everything." Ayana nodded, serious. She knew that when her father spoke of the earth swallowing things, he was referring to the treacherous mud that formed after the rains. She had already seen rabbits and even a deer disappear into the quicksand hidden among the rocks and bushes. They continued walking until they reached the valley where Nahalo usually hunted. It was a strange place, where small streams formed during the rainy season and then dried up, leaving behind soft, dangerous ground. He stopped suddenly, raising his hand. Ayana obeyed the signal and stood still. A scream. Low, muffled, desperate. Nahalo ran toward the sound, Ayana at his heels. And then they saw her. A woman was sinking into the mud up to her waist, her arms struggling to stay above the treacherous surface. Her face was contorted with terror and shame, tears mixed with the earth clinging to her skin. She was young, perhaps in her early 20s, but there was something in her eyes that spoke of a much longer, much harder life. She was different from the women Nahalo knew. She didn't have the thinness of hard times, nor the toughness of those who fight for survival every day. Her body was full, round, with curves that the dark blue dress, now muddy, tried to conceal. Her brown hair was disheveled, plastered to her sweaty forehead, and her green eyes gleamed with panic. "Please," she whispered in Spanish, her voice broken. "Don't let me die like this." Nahalo didn't hesitate. He knelt at the edge of the mud and extended his strong arm. The woman looked at him with disbelief. An Apache, a savage as she had always heard, but his eyes held no cruelty. They held compassion. "Hold tight," he said in Spanish, his Apache accent heavy, but his words clear. She hesitated for a moment. All her life she had learned to distrust, to hide, to expect the worst from others. But there, in that moment, between life and death, there was no choice. She clung to his arm tightly, feeling the tense muscles beneath his tanned skin. Nahalo pulled, once, twice. The mud didn't want to release its prey. Ayana approached, picked up a long branch, and extended it to the woman. "Hold this too, Senora," the little girl said, her sweet voice contrasting with the tension of the moment. The woman obeyed, grabbing the branch. Nahalo planted his feet firmly on the dry ground and pulled with all his might. The sound of the mud releasing was like a sigh from the earth itself. The woman was torn from the trap and fell sideways onto solid ground, gasping, dirty, but alive. She lay there for a long moment, trying to believe she was still breathing. Then she looked up and saw the Apache warrior kneeling beside her and the small girl observing her with innocent curiosity. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. Nahalo studied her face. There was something there he recognized. Not her appearance, but what he saw in her eyes: pain, loneliness, the mark of those who have no place in the world. "What's your name?" he asked. "Carmen," she replied, her voice still weak. "Carmen Delgado." "Where do you come from?" Carmen closed her eyes. The simple question opened wounds she tried to keep closed. "From Tucson," she lied. In truth, she came from much further away. She came from a ranch in Mexico where she was never welcome, where her weight was a source of cruel jokes, where her kindness was seen as weakness. She came from an arranged marriage to a man who despised her before even meeting her. She came from a desperate escape in the middle of the night, when she could no longer bear the looks of disgust and the cutting words. "Are you hurt?" Nahalo gently touched her arm, checking for cuts. Carmen shivered at the touch. It had been so long since anyone had touched her without cruelty that she had forgotten what it felt like. "No, I don't think so," she said, trying to stand. Her legs trembled and she fell back down. The experience in the mud had drained her strength, but there was something more. She hadn't eaten properly for 2 days, 2 days of walking through the desert with no destination, just fleeing. Ayana moved closer. "Father, she's very thin," the little girl said, looking at Carmen with concern. Carmen almost laughed at the irony. Thin, she who had been called fat, heavy, too much her entire life. But the child saw with innocent eyes, and perhaps it was true that the flight and desperation had stolen weight from her body. "Come with us," Nahalo said, extending his hand again. Carmen hesitated. She knew what people thought about Apaches. Savages, brutal, murderers. But this man had saved her, and that child looked at her with pure kindness. "I don't know if the desert night kills," he said simply, "and you have nowhere to go." It was true. Carmen had absolutely nothing, no destination, no plans, no hope, just the muddy clothes on her body and a heart broken into 1,000 pieces. She took his hand and stood up. The walk to the Apache village was silent. Carmen walked between Nahalo and Ayana, her steps uncertain on the uneven ground. The warrior slowed his pace so she could keep up, but he didn't speak. He just watched, attentive to any sign of weakness or danger. Ayana, on the other hand, couldn't contain her curiosity. "Are you from a big town?" she asked. "I am," Carmen replied softly. "Are there many houses?" "Many. And many people." "Yes, little one. Are they good to you?" The innocent question hit Carmen like an arrow. She stopped walking for a moment, swallowing the tears that threatened to come. "Not all of them," she managed to say. Ayana frowned, processing the answer. Then she did something unexpected. She took Carmen's hand and held it tightly. "Here will be good to you," she said with the seriousness of a child who knows the value of words. Carmen looked at the girl, then at Nahalo, who had stopped and was watching them. For a moment, something inside her chest stirred. Something that had died a long time ago was trying to breathe again. "Thank you," she whispered. The Apache village was small, perhaps 50 people living in traditional wickiups scattered in a valley protected by high rocks. When they arrived, some men approached, speaking quickly in Apache with Nahalo. Carmen didn't understand the words, but she sensed the tension. He was being questioned for bringing a stranger. An older woman with graying hair and severe eyes walked up to them. She spoke to Nahalo in Apache, then looked Carmen up and down with obvious disapproval. "This is Itzel, my mother-in-law," Nahalo said to Carmen. "She took care of Ayana when my wife died." Carmen felt the weight of his grief in his words and saw the pain he always carried in his dark eyes. Itzel said something sharp in Apache. Nahalo replied, his voice firm but respectful. The discussion continued for a few minutes until Ayana intervened, speaking quickly to her grandmother, pointing at Carmen and making dramatic gestures that likely told of the rescue in the mud. Finally, Itzel sighed and nodded. She said a few words to Nahalo and walked away. "What did she say?" Carmen asked. "That you can stay tonight," Nahalo replied. "But only tonight." Carmen nodded. One night was more than she expected, more than she deserved. Nahalo led her to his wickiup, a dome-shaped structure made of curved branches and covered with animal hides and fabrics. It was simple, but cozy. In the center, a small fire warmed the space. Animal furs served as beds and seats. "You can rest there," he said, pointing to a corner. Carmen sat down carefully, her body still aching from the experience in the mud. Ayana brought a gourd with water and offered it to her. "Drink," the little girl said. "Good water." Carmen drank, and it was truly the sweetest water she had ever tasted. Or perhaps it was just the taste of salvation. Nahalo prepared a simple corn porridge and offered it to her. Carmen ate in silence, watching father and daughter. There was a tenderness between them that deeply touched her. The way he adjusted the girl's hair, how she leaned against him when he spoke, how they communicated with small glances and gestures. "Your wife," Carmen began but stopped, realizing it might be too intimate. "She died last winter," Nahalo said simply. "White man's sickness." "I'm sorry." He nodded, stirring the fire with a stick. "Ayana needs a mother," he said after a long silence. "But there are no single women in the village. And Itzel, she's a good grandmother, but she's getting old." Carmen looked at the girl, who had lain down near the fire and was sleeping soundly. Even in sleep, there was a sadness on her small face that broke her heart. "She's beautiful," she whispered. "She's strong too," Nahalo said with pride. "But a child shouldn't have to be so strong." Carmen understood. She had been a strong child too, forced to grow up too fast, to deal with rejection and cruelty before even understanding why. "Why did you save me?" she asked. Nahalo studied her for a long moment before answering. "Because you cried for help," he said, "and because I saw in your eyes that you know pain." Carmen felt the tears come. No one had ever seen her pain before. No one had ever cared enough to look beyond her appearance and see what truly mattered. "Thank you," she said, her voice broken. "Sleep," Nahalo said. "Tomorrow we will decide what to do." Carmen lay down on the soft furs, listening to the crackling fire and Ayana's gentle breathing. For the first time in months, she felt safe. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but at that moment, enveloped in the warmth of the fire and the unexpected kindness of strangers, she allowed herself to hope. On the other side of the fire, Nahalo remained awake for hours, observing the woman he had saved. There was something about her he couldn't identify, something that spoke directly to the emptiness in his chest, to the place where his wife used to be. It wasn't attraction, not yet at least. It was something deeper. Recognition, as if her wounds echoed his own. When he finally slept, he dreamed of his wife, Kaya. She stood on the bank of a river smiling and pointed to something behind him. Nahalo turned in the dream and saw Carmen, but not as she was now, muddy and scared. He saw her as she could be, strong, smiling, holding Ayana's hand. He woke before dawn, with his heart pounding and the absolute certainty that his life was about to change forever. Carmen woke to the smell of sweet smoke and the low sound of voices speaking in Apache. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the memory returned, the mud, the rescue, the kindness of strangers. She sat up slowly, feeling every muscle in her body ache from the previous day's experience. Ayana was sitting near the fire, playing with small dolls made of straw and cloth, When she saw Carmen wake up, her face lit up. "Good morning, Señora Carmen," the little girl said, mixing Spanish with a few Apache words. "Good morning, little one," Carmen replied, trying to smooth her disheveled hair. Nahalo entered the wickiup carrying firewood. He stopped when he saw her awake, his dark eyes studying her face, as if looking for signs of fever or weakness. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Better," Carmen lied. In truth, she felt lost, scared, not knowing what to do or where to go. But she didn't want to seem more pathetic than she already was. Nahalo placed the firewood next to the fire and turned to her. "Itzel wants to speak with you," he said. "Now." Carmen felt her stomach clench. Nahalo's mother-in-law had made it clear. The night before that, she didn't approve of her presence. She probably wanted her to leave immediately. "Father, can I come too?" Ayana asked. "No," Nahalo replied, but his voice was gentle. "Watch the fire." Carmen stood up, smoothed her dirty dress, and followed Nahalo outside. The morning was clear and cold, and she could see the village for the first time in daylight. It was more organized than she had imagined. The wickiups were arranged in a semicircle, protected by natural rocks. Women cared for small children. Men sharpened arrows and repaired equipment. Everyone stopped to look at her as she passed. Itzel waited for her outside her wickiup, arms crossed, face severe. She spoke quickly in Apache with Nahalo, who responded in a respectful but firm tone. The discussion lasted a few minutes until Itzel made an impatient gesture and addressed Carmen directly in broken Spanish. Where do you come from?" The truth this time. Carmen hesitated. She had lied the night before, but something in the older woman's gaze told her it would be useless to lie again. "From Mexico," she said softly. "From a ranch near Chihuahua." "Did you run away?" Carmen nodded, unable to speak. "From what? Husband? Family?" "From everything," Carmen managed to say, tears threatening to fall. Itzel studied her for a long moment. Then she said something in Apache to Nahalo, who seemed surprised by the answer. "What did she say?" Carmen asked. "That you can stay 3 days," Nahalo translated, "to recover. Then you must go your way." Carmen nodded, grateful for any time. She could have. 3 days were better than nothing. But 3 days turned into a week, and a week into 2. Carmen didn't talk about leaving, and Nahalo didn't bring up the subject. Gradually, she began to find her place in the village routine. First, it was with Ayana. The girl followed her everywhere, fascinated by this strange woman who spoke Spanish and knew different stories. Carmen began to tell tales her own mother had told her, stories of princesses and dragons, of love and courage. Ayana listened with bright eyes, interrupting to ask questions in her charming mix of Apache and Spanish. "Carmen, do you know a story about a brave woman?" she asked one afternoon as they played near the stream. "I know several," Carmen replied, braiding flowers into the girl's hair. "Tell me one." Carmen thought for a moment, then began the story of a princess who wasn't beautiful like the others, but who had a big heart and saved the entire kingdom with her kindness. Ayana listened in silence, then said, "You're like her." "How so?" "You have a big heart," the girl said simply, as if it were obvious. Carmen felt something stir within her chest. No one had ever told her she had a big heart, only that she was different, inadequate, inconvenient. Gradually, Carmen began to help with village tasks. She didn't know much about Apache life, but she knew how to sew, cook, and care for children. The village women observed her with initial curiosity, then with growing acceptance when they saw that she worked hard and didn't complain. Takoda, Nahalo's younger brother, was the first man besides him to speak to her directly. "You cook well," he said one day. after tasting a stew she had prepared with the ingredients she knew. "Thank you," Carmen replied, blushing. "Nahalo is eating better," Takoda continued, a small smile on his face. "I haven't seen him like this in months." Carmen looked to where Nahalo was sitting with Ayana, both sharing the stew. He hadn't said anything about the food, but she had noticed he ate everything and even had seconds. At night, when Ayana was asleep, Carmen and Nahalo sometimes stayed awake by the fire. They didn't talk much, but the companionship was comfortable. He would mend arrows or tan leather, she would sew or mend clothes. Sometimes he would tell stories about hunts or Ayana's childhood. She listened in silence, learning about him through his careful words. One night, Ayana had a nightmare. She woke up screaming, calling for her mother. Nahalo got up quickly, but Carmen was faster. She picked up the girl, gently rocked her, sang a Spanish lullaby her own mother used to sing. Ayana calmed in Carmen's arms, whispering "mommy" in Apache as she drifted back to sleep. Nahalo stopped in the middle of the wickiup, watching the scene. His eyes met Carmen's over his daughter's head, and something passed between them. Not words, but understanding. Recognition. "Thank you," he said softly. Carmen simply nodded, still cradling Ayana, but not everything was peace. Itzel remained suspicious, especially when she saw how Nahalo looked at Carmen. And there were other signs that the outside world hadn't forgotten Carmen's existence. A Mexican merchant passed through the village on his regular trading route. Carmen hid in a wickiup when she saw him arrive, but not before he noticed her presence. He asked questions about her, describing a runaway woman who was being sought by her family. "They said she stole when she ran away," the merchant told Nahalo, "that she's dangerous." Nahalo didn't respond, but his eyes hardened. After the merchant left, he confronted Carmen. "Is it true?" he asked directly. Carmen felt her world collapse. "I didn't steal money," she said, her voice trembling. "But I took some supplies, food, a blanket. I couldn't leave with nothing. And why were you fleeing?" Carmen took a deep breath. It was time for the truth. "My father promised me in marriage to a rich man," she said, the words coming out like a confession. "Don Ricardo Vasquez, a cruel rancher who had already had 3 wives. All of them died young. He saw me once and said he wanted me because I was robust, that I would bear strong children." Nahalo waited, knowing there was more. "I tried to tell my father I didn't want to, that I was afraid. He said a woman like me should be grateful for any man who wanted her, that I was too ugly to be picky." The tears came then, all the ones she had held back for months of humiliation. "The night before the wedding, I heard Don Ricardo talking to my brothers, saying that after I bore the children he wanted, he would send me to work in the kitchen with the other maids, that a fat wife was useful for childbirth, but for nothing else." Nahalo felt anger rising in his chest, not at Carmen, but at the men who had treated a woman like livestock. "So I ran away," Carmen continued. "I took what I could carry and left in the middle of the night. I've been walking for 2 weeks, sleeping outside, eating what I find, until I reached the mud that almost killed me." "And they're still looking for you?" Carmen nodded miserably. "Don Ricardo doesn't like it when his will is thwarted. And my father had to return the dowry. They will look for me until they find me." Nahalo was silent for a long time, processing the information. Finally, he spoke. "You are safe here," he said simply. "But when they come, if they come," Nahalo interrupted her, "we will deal with it." Carmen looked into his eyes and saw something she had never seen directed at her before. Protection, determination, as if she was worth defending. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you protect me?" Nahalo hesitated, struggling with words he didn't usually say. Because Ayana calls you Mama when she thinks no one is listening, he said finally. Because you make her laugh. Because you cook with the intention of feeding us well, not just to fulfill an obligation. Because it's been a long time since I've seen my daughter truly happy. He paused, then added lower, and because it's been a long time since I've felt less alone. Carmen felt her heart beat faster. It wasn't a declaration of love, not yet. But it was something deeper. It was choice. It was commitment. Me too, she whispered. I also feel less alone. That night, for the first time since she arrived, Carmen slept deeply, without nightmares, without fear. She dreamed she was planting a garden with Ayana, teaching the girl the names of the plants in Spanish, while Nahalo watched them in the shade of a tree, smiling. But 3 days later, the nightmare became reality. Don Ricardo Vasquez arrived at the village with 6 armed men, demanding that Carmen be handed over to him. He was a large man, with a prominent belly and a grey moustache, dressed like a rich rancher who was used to getting everything he wanted. I know the woman is here, he said in a loud Spanish, addressing Nahalo as if he were the village chief. Carmen Delgado. She was promised to me and belongs to me. Carmen, hidden inside the wickiup with Ayana, felt terror run through her body like ice. There is no woman by that name here, Nahalo replied in Spanish, his voice calm but firm. Liar, Don Ricardo shouted. The merchant told me he saw her. Fat, brown hair, blue dress. She stole from my property and ran away like a criminal. Several Apache warriors approached, sensing the tension. Takoda stood beside his brother, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. You are in Apache territory, Nahalo said, his voice dropping dangerously. Your laws do not apply here. Laws? Don Ricardo laughed cruelly. You savages talk of laws. I have 6 armed men and a document that gives me rights over that woman. You are just Indians. It was a mistake. The insult echoed through the village, and Carmen saw through a crack how the Apache men positioned themselves. The tension in the air was almost visible. Ayana, Carmen whispered to the girl who was trembling with fear beside her. Listen to me. If something happens, you run to the creek and hide in the rocks. Understand? I don't want you to leave, Ayana cried softly. I'm not going, Carmen said with a conviction that surprised her. I won't leave you. She stepped out of the wickiup. Silence fell over the camp when Carmen appeared. Don Ricardo smiled a cruel smile, satisfied. There she is, he said. Come, Carmen, time to go home and pay for what you did. Carmen walked slowly until she stood beside Nahalo. She felt fear, but she also felt something new, anger. Anger for having fled for so long, for having hidden, for having accepted her whole life that she deserved less than others. My name is Carmen Delgado, she said, her voice stronger than she expected, and I'm not going with you. Don Ricardo laughed. You have no choice, fatty. You belong to me. I belong to no one, Carmen replied, lifting her chin. Oh, really? Don Ricardo signaled to his men. We'll see about that. That's when Ayana ran out of the wickiup and stood in front of Carmen, her small arms open as if she could protect her. Don't touch my mommy, she cried in Spanish, her voice small but fierce. Carmen's heart stopped. Mommy, in front of everyone. Fearless, unashamed. Don Ricardo looked at the child with disdain. Get that little Indian out of the way, he said to one of his men. The man approached Ayana. Nahalo moved like lightning, the blade of his knife glinting in the sun as he placed it at the man's throat. Touch my daughter, and you die, he said, his voice so cold it made Don Ricardo step back. This is ridiculous, Don Ricardo said, but Carmen noticed the nervousness in his voice. Are you going to start a war over a woman who isn't even worth it? This woman, Nahalo said, finally removing the knife but remaining ready to use it. Saved my daughter from despair. She brought joy to our home. She works hard, treats everyone with respect, and never asks for anything in return. She is worth more than all of you combined. Carmen felt tears come. No one had ever defended her like this. No one had ever said she was worth anything. And besides, Nahalo continued, she is my wife. The silence was total. Carmen looked at him in shock, as did everyone else. Wife? Don Ricardo stammered. That's impossible. She was promised to me. She was promised by a father who treated her as property, Nahalo said. But she chose freely, and I choose her too. Carmen felt the world spin. Was he lying to protect her? Or... Nahalo turned to her, extended his hand. If this is what you want, he said softly, just for her. If you accept me as your husband, as the protector of your life and the father of your heart. If you accept Ayana as your daughter and this place as your home. Carmen looked into his eyes and saw truth. It wasn't just protection. It was real choice. It was love slowly being born, built on respect and mutual care. She took his hand. I accept, she said, her voice clear and strong. Don Ricardo's face turned red with rage. This won't stand, he shouted. I'll be back with more men. I'll be back with soldiers. Come back with whoever you want, Takoda said, speaking for the first time. This is Apache land, and she is Apache family now. Don Ricardo and his men left with threats and promises of revenge. But at that moment, Carmen didn't care about the future. She was holding Nahalo's hand, while Ayana clung to her skirt, shouting with joy, Now you're my real mommy! Carmen knelt and hugged the girl, finally letting the tears fall. But they weren't tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of a love that finally had a place to reside. That night, there was a simple ceremony. Carmen and Nahalo exchanged vows before the village, their hands bound by a rope braided by Ayana. It wasn't just a marriage of convenience. It was two wounded souls choosing to heal together. But Carmen knew that Don Ricardo wouldn't give up easily, and when he returned, he would come prepared for war. The peace they had found would be tested in ways they couldn't yet imagine. 3 weeks passed since the wedding, and Carmen had begun to believe that perhaps Don Ricardo was just a cowardly man making empty threats. She had fully integrated into village life, and even Itzel had begun to treat her with something close to respect, especially after seeing how Ayana flourished under her care. Carmen had learned a few words in Apache, and Ayana mixed the 3 languages with the natural ease of children. At night, the two sang Spanish lullabies, while Nahalo listened with a small smile that lit up his entire face. Mama Carmen, Ayana said one morning, while helping her adoptive mother wash clothes at the creek. Will you always stay with us? Always, Carmen replied without hesitation, touching the girl's small face. There's nowhere else in the world I'd rather be. Even if bad men come back. Carmen felt a tightness in her chest, but kept her voice firm. Especially if bad men come back, I won't let anyone separate us. But her words were tested sooner than expected. Takoda ran into the camp that same afternoon, sweaty and out of breath. Nahalo, he shouted, Mexican soldiers, many of them, coming our way. Carmen felt her blood run cold. Nahalo stood up from where he was working, his expression hardening instantly. How many? 20, maybe more. And there's another group of men with them, not soldiers, rich ranchers. Carmen knew who it was before Takoda even confirmed. Don, Ricardo, she whispered. Nahalo nodded, his mind already working through options. The village had only 12 warriors fit to fight. Against 20 armed soldiers, the odds weren't good. We have to evacuate, Itzel said, who had approached. Take the women and children to the caves in the mountains." "No," Carmen said suddenly, surprising everyone. "They'll keep pursuing us. Don Ricardo won't give up until he has me back, and now you've humiliated him. He'll hunt this village until he completely destroys it." "Then what do you suggest?" Nahalo asked. Carmen took a deep breath, feeling a courage she never knew she possessed growing within her. "That I go with them." "No!" Ayana cried, clinging to Carmen's skirt. "You can't leave!" "Never," Nahalo said, his voice sharp as a blade. "I will not hand over my wife to those men. But if I don't go, how many will die?" "And did," Carmen asked, tears starting to fall. "How many children will be orphaned? How many wives will be widowed?" "Carmen," Nahalo approached, taking her hands. "You are family now. We don't abandon family." Carmen looked into his eyes and saw absolute determination. She also saw the love that had grown between them, silent but strong as the mountains. "Then we fight," she said, her voice gaining strength. "All of us, together." Takoda came closer. "There's something you should know," he said, hesitating. "The soldiers, they're not Mexican. Some of the men I saw are American. And there's a United States Army officer with them." Carmen was confused. "But why? Why would the American Army get involved in a conflict over a marriage?" The answer came from an unexpected source. An older Apache woman, Ayana, who rarely spoke to strangers, approached the group. "Because it's not about marriage," she said in broken Spanish. "It's about a land." Everyone turned to her. "Explain," Nahalo asked. "Yesterday, different merchant passed through here, spoke of new American law. Government wants to move all Apaches from this region, sent a reservation far from here. And there are rumors of gold in nearby mountains." Carmen felt the pieces clicking into place. "Don Ricardo isn't just after me," she said slowly. "He's using my escape as an excuse to bring soldiers and push you off your land." The realization hit everyone like lightning. It wasn't just about a runaway woman. It was about the survival of an entire people. "Then we really need to evacuate," Itzel said. "No," Carmen said again, but this time her voice was different. There was something in it that wasn't there before. Determination, fury. "We won't run, we will fight, but intelligently." "What are you thinking?" Nahalo asked. Carmen began to pace, her brain working quickly. "Don Ricardo made a mistake bringing American soldiers. That means he lied to them about what's happening here. Soldiers follow orders, but they don't like being tricked." "Go on," Takoda said. "And I know something about Don Ricardo that he doesn't want anyone to know," Carmen continued, an audacious idea forming in her mind. "What?" Carmen hesitated, then decided it was time to reveal her last secret. "My name isn't really Carmen Delgado," she said softly. "It's Carmen Vasquez. Don Ricardo is my uncle." The silence was absolute. "Your uncle?" Nahalo repeated. "Yes, my father was his younger brother, but he lost everything gambling. When he died, he left me as an inheritance to Don Ricardo to pay off debts. He decided it would be more profitable to marry me than sell me as a servant, because that way he could keep the family property within the family." Why didn't you tell us this before?" Nahalo asked, not with anger but curiosity. Because I was ashamed of my own family's greed, and because Don Ricardo told me that if I told anyone about the real reasons for the marriage, he would kill anyone who helped me." Carmen took a deep breath. "But there's more. Don Ricardo murdered his 3 previous wives. It wasn't sickness or accident. He killed them when he grew tired of them. And I have proof." "What kind of proof?" "Before I ran away, I stole a letter he had written to an accomplice, detailing how he had poisoned his last wife. I kept it hidden, thinking I might need it someday." Carmen ran to the wiki-up and returned with a carefully folded piece of paper. "This letter can destroy him," she said, "but only if it reaches the right authorities." "And how did you plan to do that?" Itzel asked, for the first time seeming genuinely interested in what Carmen had to say. "I didn't know before, but now I know exactly how." Carmen's plan was risky, but brilliant. They wouldn't try to resist when the soldiers arrived. Instead, she would voluntarily surrender, but only to the American officer, not to Don Ricardo. And when she did, she would reveal the truth about who he really was and show the letter. "It's too dangerous," Nahalo protested. If it doesn't work, at least we tried to do the right thing," Carmen replied. "But it will work. Don Ricardo is arrogant. He'll want to humiliate me in front of everyone, and when he does, he'll expose himself." 2 hours later, the sound of horses' hooves echoed through the valley. 20 Mexican and American soldiers, led by a gray-haired American officer, and 5 men, who were clearly rich ranchers. Don Ricardo rode in front, his face red with anticipated triumph. The Apache village waited for them in formation. Women and children behind, warriors in front, Carmen and Nahalo in the center, with Ayana between them. "Indians!" Don Ricardo shouted before even dismounting. "Hand over the woman you stole from me." The American officer, Major Thompson, dismounted and walked up to Nahalo. "I'm Major Thompson of the United States Army," he said in English. Takoda translated, "We are here investigating allegations of kidnapping and assault against Mexican war citizens." Carmen stepped forward. "Major Thompson," she said in fluent English, surprising everyone, "I am the woman you are talking about, and I have something very important to show you." Don Ricardo turned red. "Don't listen to her. She's a liar and a thief." "Sir," Major Thompson said coldly to Don Ricardo, "please allow me to conduct my investigation." He turned to Carmen. "Continue, madam." Carmen took a deep breath. "Major, this man is not just my rejected suitor. He is my uncle, Don Ricardo Vasquez, and he is a murderer." The scandal was immediate. Don Ricardo began shouting denials, but Carmen continued, her voice firm and clear. "I have here a letter written by him himself, detailing how he poisoned his last wife," she said, showing the paper. "He doesn't want to marry me for love, Major. He wants to kill me, too, after using my body to produce heirs." Major Thompson took the letter, read it quickly. His expression grew increasingly grim. "This is extremely serious," he said. "Lies," Don Ricardo shouted. "She forged it. She's crazy." "The handwriting is yours, Uncle," Carmen said calmly, "and there are living witnesses to the deaths. If the Major investigates, he will find the truth." But Don Ricardo was not a man to give up easily. With a cry of rage, he pulled out a pistol and pointed it directly at Carmen. "If I can't have her, no one can." It all happened in seconds. Nahalo lunged in front of Carmen. The pistol fired. Nahalo fell. Carmen screamed, kneeling beside her husband. Blood welled from his shoulder, but his eyes were still open, still conscious. "Father!" Ayana cried, running to them. It was then that something inside Carmen finally shattered completely. All the submission, all the fear, all the resignation she had carried throughout her life evaporated in an instant. She stood up slowly, her eyes fixed on Don Ricardo, who still held the smoking pistol. "You!" she said, her voice low but charged with a fury that made even the soldiers recoil. "You hurt my husband. You scared my daughter. You threatened my family." She walked towards Don Ricardo, who pointed the gun at her again. "Stop right there, useless fatty." Carmen didn't stop. She kept walking, fearless, without hesitation. "All my life, men like you told me I was worthless," she said, her voice growing, "that I was ugly, heavy, inconvenient, that I should be grateful for any attention, even if it was cruel." Don Ricardo pulled the trigger again, but the gun misfired. His hands trembled. But now I know the truth, Carmen continued, getting close enough to touch the barrel of the pistol. You are the one who's worthless. You are cowardly, cruel, pathetic, and you will never hurt anyone I love again. With a swift movement that surprised everyone, Carmen snatched the pistol from Don Ricardo's hands and broke it over her knee, the metal shattering. Major Thompson, who had watched the entire scene in shock, finally reacted. Don Ricardo Vasquez, he said, signaling to his soldiers, you are under arrest for attempted murder, fraud, and under suspicion of multiple homicides. This is outrageous, Don Ricardo shouted as he was handcuffed. You can't trust the word of a fat Indian woman. Carmen turned to him one last time. I'm not Indian, she said calmly, but even if I were, I'd be worth 1,000 times more than you. Then she ran back to Nahalo, whom Takoda and other men were helping to sit up. The wound was serious, but not fatal. You're crazy, Nahalo said, trying to smile despite the pain. You could have been killed. I wasn't going to let him hurt anyone else, Carmen replied, pressing a clean cloth against the wound. Especially not you. Mommy was very brave, Ayana said, her eyes shining with pride and relief. Major Thompson approached. Madam Vasquez, he said respectfully, I need your official testimony regarding these crimes, and I'd like to ensure that you and your family will be safe. Our family is safe here, Carmen replied, looking around the Apache village that had become her home. This is our home. I understand. And about the land issue. Carmen stood up to face him. Major, these people saved my life and gave me a home when I had nothing. They are not savages or threats. They are good people who only want to live in peace, and this land is theirs by right. Major Thompson nodded slowly. I will include that in my report, and the letter you provided will be sufficient evidence to ensure that Don Ricardo pays for his crimes. Don Ricardo was led away in chains, shouting threats and curses until he disappeared over the horizon. With him went the fears that had haunted Carmen her entire life. In the weeks that followed, life in the village returned to normal. Nahalo recovered completely, although Carmen spoiled him far beyond what was necessary, according to Itzel, who now smiled when she said it. One afternoon, as Carmen taught Ayana to bake bread, the girl asked, Mommy, were you really a brave princess from the stories you tell? Carmen laughed, kissing the top of her daughter's head. No, little eagle. Brave princesses are born brave. I had to learn to be brave, and I only could because you taught me I was worth protecting. And now? Now I know all of us can be brave when we protect those we love. That night, when Ayana slept between them, Carmen and Nahalo stayed awake, talking softly by the fire. Do you have any regrets, he asked, about leaving your previous life? Carmen looked around the simple wickiup, heard the familiar sounds of the village falling asleep, felt the warmth of the man she had chosen to love, and the child she had chosen as her daughter. The only thing I regret, she said, is not having run away sooner. Nahalo smiled, one of those rare smiles that completely transformed his face. And I regret not having looked for you sooner. How could you? You didn't know I existed. Oh, but I did, he said, gently touching her face. My heart knew it was waiting for someone. I just didn't know who. Carmen leaned in to kiss him, a soft kiss that spoke of love built on trust, on choice, on shared. Days and protected nights. When they pulled apart, she whispered, I love you. I love you too, he replied, words that had been slow to come, but now came naturally. Months later, when Carmen discovered she was expecting a baby, the joy in the village was immense. Ayana was beside herself with excitement at the prospect of being a big sister. I'll teach the baby everything, she said, carefully stroking Carmen's still small belly. It'll know Apache, Spanish, and English. And it will be strong like its father, and brave like its mother, Nahalo added, embracing his two favorite women. Carmen smiled, feeling the future open before her like a golden dawn. She had found more than love. She had found her place in the world, her family, her strength, and in that arid land where she had almost died sinking in the mud, she had planted roots that would grow for generations. The following spring, when the wildflowers covered the valley in vibrant colors, Miguel Nahalo Vasquez was born, a strong boy with dark eyes like his father and a sweet smile like his mother. Ayana held him with reverent care, whispering lullabies in all three languages, while Carmen and Nahalo watched, hearts overflowing with gratitude. The family that had been born from mud and compassion was now complete. And throughout the region, when people told stories of true love and second chances, they always included the legend of the woman who was saved twice, first from the quicksand, then from a life without love, and the warrior who learned that the greatest victory is not one with weapons, but with an open heart.